Hey everybody, Christopher Wing here, and I am back with the next in my series of stories about my trip to go around the world in under 80 hours and visit every Disney theme park on Earth. And I was away for a while because I moved. The painting behind me is familiar perhaps, but the wall is new. So now that I'm all settled into my new place, I figured it'd be a good time to get started on picking up where I left off on my stories about my trip. So, when we last left, I was at Epcot. I had a kind of slightly awkward meet and greet with Baymax, and now it was time to get over to the next park on my list, which was Disney's Hollywood Studios. So, my original plan was to start at Epcot, walk to Disney's Hollywood Studios via the International Gateway, but then, of course, the folks from Disney called me up shortly before I left and said, "Hey, we're going to have this film crew." So they had a private van and they would just take me from park to park, which was great. It also meant that they were able to sort of backdoor me into the park, so I didn't necessarily go through the front gate of every single park that I went to, which I know right now there's somebody out there who's like crying foul. You didn't really go in the front gate of every park, therefore, you cheated or something. But I would say that having the private van and the film crew, it sounds like a really, really cool thing. It actually turned out to take up a lot more time than if I had just taken the Disney bus. So after we were done meeting Baymax, basically we went over towards Universe of Energy, and right between Universe of Energy and Wonders of Life, there's a little teeny path that's for employees only. Please do not go down this path. And it took us basically behind Wonders of Life, behind where Body Wars used to be, and we all piled in, very nondescript white van. And then we had to drive all the way around the back of Epcot, past the back of Rock and Roller Coaster, and back behind kind of the animation building to a big parking structure that I didn't even know was there, which we had to wind up and up and up and up because all the parking spaces were reserved for like executives and above, I guess. And so there was nary a free parking space to be had, even though most of the garage was empty. So we just popped out right around where the animation building is, headed over to the Great Movie Ride to ride it. Now, before I talk about that experience, let's talk a little bit about just how Disney's Hollywood Studios came to be in the first place. So basically what happened was that Universal Studios was looking at expanding their business out. They obviously had Universal Studios in Hollywood. Actually, it's in Burbank, but close enough. And they said, oh, we should get some land in Florida and build a second one there. But Disney, of course, was not so enthusiastic about this new competition in Florida and tried pretty much everything they could to stop this theme park from happening. So the first thing they did was they announced, okay, well, if you go ahead and build a studio in Florida just down the street from Walt Disney World, then we're going to build a studio in Burbank just down the street from Universal Studios Hollywood. And I was digging through my clip drawer the other day, and I found this clipping from the LA Times from, I think, 1987. I don't know if you can read the headline. It says, MCA was the company that owned Universal at the time. MCA official accuses Disney of blackmail tactics. And basically, it's kind of going through the story of them threatening, if you don't call off this project in Florida, we're going to go ahead and build a studio right next to Universal Studios in California. Ultimately, they backed off this, but then Disney sort of switched tactics. And they said, okay, we can't stop you from building the theme park in Florida, but guess what, Universal? We're going to build our own theme park in Florida. But Universal announced their theme park in 1986. And Disney announced their theme park in Florida in 1987. And the original plan for eventual plan for the Universal Studios theme park was to open in 1990. So Disney said, you know what, not only are we announcing after you, but we're going to open before you in 1989. Now, if you do the math there, you can see that Universal basically spent 4 years working on their park, and Disney only spent 2 years working on their park. Now, when it first opened, it was not called Disney's Hollywood Studios. It was called Disney MGM Studios. And the reason for that is because Disney didn't really have a big catalog of classic Hollywood movies. I mean, obviously they had great animation like Pinocchio and Seven Dwarfs and so forth, but they didn't really have, a lot of live action films under their belt. And so they said, we need somebody to partner with to kind of showcase the stars of yesteryear Hollywood. So they looked around. Obviously, Universal was not going to play ball with them on this front, but they lucked out with MGM. Because MGM was really having some dire financial straits at the time. So they made a deal that basically said, hey, we get to use the MGM library of films, and we get to use the name, and we get to use the Leo the Lion roaring logo. And we get to do all of this and pay you, I think it was something like $1 million a year, which might sound like a lot, but in terms of Hollywood, this is like chump change. And it was very interesting too because Kirk Corrigan, who owned MGM at the time, apparently was like out somewhere when this deal was made. And so when he came back from his vacation or wherever he was pretty much like shocked and aghast and couldn't believe that they had sold the rights to all this stuff to Disney for so ridiculously cheap. To say that MGM was never really 100% fully on board, even though they had signed paperwork to that effect, was kind of interesting. That's part of the reason, by the way, that it is no longer Disney MGM Studios, because the license that Disney had was basically for 20 years. And once that 20 years was up, maybe they could have tried to get it renewed, but I'm sure that MGM would have said, yeah, the rates have gone up if you want to keep that MGM name. So eventually they just dropped it. Disney MGM Studios opens in 1989, May 1st, 1989, and I mentioned that they only spent 2 years, building it, and as you can imagine, that meant that the park itself was rather limited, to put it lightly. So one of my most prized guide maps is this one. This is a beautiful mint condition guide map from when the park opened in 1989, and in it, you can see the park map here. And I'll blow that up so you can see it a little bit more clearly. But basically, there are really only 2 or 3 areas to walk around in. There's no Sunset Boulevard or Tower of Terror, Fantasmic, or Muppet Vision, or Star Tours, or pretty much or anything really. I mean, certainly no Toy Story Mania, nothing. Basically, there's just the Hollywood Boulevard kind of Main Street type area. There's a stunt show, which isn't even listed actually as the Indiana Jones stunt show because I don't think they had actually gotten the rights to that one yet. So it's just listed as Epic Stunt Spectacular. Then there's a Monster Sound show, and then there's this kind of put yourself into classic TV shows kind of thing, Superstar Television. The centerpiece of the park, the Great Movie Ride. And then the rest is all a really, 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 really super long tour, which is half walking tour and half of a backlot tram tour. Now, one of the big deals about building a studio theme park is, if you're going to claim that it's a studio, you actually have to film something there. So they put together a bunch of sound stages, and they had this sort of catwalk thing above them with these glass panel hallways, and you would walk from soundstage to soundstage to soundstage to soundstage, and it would take forever. I mean, it was like 45 minutes of just walking. And there was no break, and you couldn't, it's like, God help you if you need to use the bathroom, or I don't know what, but I remember taking this tour shortly after it opened and just wondering, like, are we there yet? When is this tour going to end? One of the problems, though, with looking at sound stages is that 9 times out of 10, nobody's actually going to be filming anything there. So, on the odd chance you might be able to see them filming something from the Disney Channel or Star Search or something like that. But most of the time they were either empty or just, a few sets but nothing in them. So it wasn't the most compelling walking tour either, not to mention the fact that it was way too long. Then you got to go on a tram tour, which is a little bit better, and they didn't actually really film very much on the back lot, but they had some sets that you could go past. For example, the Golden Girls house and the Empty Nest house and a few other houses and props and airplanes and things like that. And then because Universal's tour actually has a lot of kind of ride type experiences while you're on the tram tour, like the King Kong confrontation or Battlestar Galactica's space laser battle, or the earthquake scene, or whatever, all these kind of things. Disney didn't really have anything like that, so they said, oh well, let's build this catastrophe canyon, and we'll bring the tram into this canyon, and then there'll be big fire explosions and floods and water and everything. And yeah, I mean, it was exciting, but it just seemed kind of sort of a pastiche of movie tropes more than anything. But okay, fine. And then that was basically it. I mean, that was the tram tour and that was the walking tour. And one thing that's also interesting to notice is that the tram tour went through this New York Street area that you can walk around in now. But back then, it was part of the tram tour. It was not open to be walked around. So if you look at the map and you look at where you could actually walk in the park, I mean, the whole thing is just a couple of 100 feet in any direction. I mean, it's really, really, really tiny. One thing I did want to point out on this map too is that there used to be a really very elaborate hidden Mickey in the park. If you turn the map upside down, you can see it a little bit more clearly. And it's basically made up of the planting areas out in front of the Great Movie Ride, and then one ear of Mickey Mouse is Echo Lake, and then the other ear was more or less kind of the roof of the Brown Derby. But when they built the Sunset Boulevard expansion with Tower of Terror, they kind of bulldozed most of that section of Mickey's ear. And the plantings have changed over the years, so that the shape of them no longer really quite makes out the Mickey shape anymore, which is a pity, but it was a kind of a cool hidden Mickey when it existed. So back to my visit. When I was there, we rode the Great Movie Ride. Now, a lot of people asked, did you get backdoored on all the rides? We did get backdoored into the Great Movie Ride, but that does not mean that I skipped the line. So basically, I had to hang around in the forecourt area outside the Great Movie Ride for quite some time. And they got the brilliant idea, like, oh, you got the hands in cement here. We should film you putting your hands in the cement. The only problem was, it was first thing in the morning of a very humid day in Florida, and they were full of the muckiest, murkiest, grimiest, pond scummiest water you have ever seen in your entire life. And at this point, I was like, look, I'll put my hands in the mucky water. That's fine. As long as I get to use the bathroom afterwards and wash, I think it should be okay. But they're like, no. We need to clean them out. So then somebody had to be dispatched to go and find a roll of paper towels somewhere to bring back. And then we spent several minutes mopping out all of the different handprints that I might want to use. And then I did this B-roll of me sticking my hands in the handprints, and then I don't think it even made it into the video that we used at the end. So there's a little bit of behind the scenes. Once we got on the ride, though, it was pretty much just, I rode it through, and I've got to say, if I ever had any thoughts of being an actor, I think they were pretty much dashed by me watching myself on this ride, because there's a scene where we go through and we get to the room where it's the cowboy scene, and they throw the dynamite in the building, and there's a big fireball. And you can see me, if you watch the video on the Disney.com website, where I just react like, whoa! And it's horrible. Oh my goodness, it's horrible. I can't believe it. It's not my finest hour, I gotta say. The worst thing is that was, I was conscious of the camera, and I was heightening up my reactions a little bit, but not too much. So that's actually kind of what I look like, and it's scary. Anyways, so we rode the attraction. It was a lot of fun. And of course, then we had to get over to Animal Kingdom. So we had to go back out past the animation building. Strangely enough, they had me stop. We actually went down Sunset Boulevard, and they had me stop next to Tower of Terror. And we stood like kind of in between Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster. So they were pointing the camera up, and Tower of Terror was in the background. And they were like, hey, look, it's Tower of Terror. And so I'm like, hey, look, it's Tower of Terror. And I'm like, I don't know what this is, like apropos of nothing. I have no idea what this is going to be used for. And indeed, it was not used in the video at the end, but I'm like, okay, you say jump, I'll say how high. So there you go. But in any event, then we made our way back to that big parking structure, walked all the way up, circled all the way back down, and then drove over to Animal Kingdom, which is where we will pick up the next part of the story. Thank you so much for listening to this. Please subscribe, and if you haven't already, you can check out this video and many others on my blog, which is MouseAroundTheWorld.com, and I will see you all soon.